Counselor Wong,
Present.
Counselor Rosenthal,
Present.
Counselor Lewis,
Present.
Counselor Simpson.
Present. Good morning.
I believe Counselor Gonzalez and Counselor Nolan should be joining us today shortly, and Council President Peterson.
Present. Thank you. All right. We have for today, we have one very long conversation about the supportive housing services update. As you'll recall, last week you had the supportive annual services quarterly report presentation. And Deputy President Simpson shared a few brief updates on the work group on future supportive housing services then. Thank you for doing that. We are going to do a quick update with you all, and I'm going to kick that off. We've had 2 meetings. The work group has had eye-opening conversations as we look to the future of SHS program, including advancing the reforms we've been discussing with stakeholders and partners for over a year. I'm sorry, I've just got 2 different conversations going in script, so I'm trying to figure out between the 2 of them. There are 3, as you'll recall, 3 counselors on the work group. It is Counselor Lewis, Counselor Simpson, and myself. Basically a contingent of folks that represent the counties, 2 from each county, 2 representatives of cities from each of the counties. And remember how many non-elected we have at this point, because we just added one.
4, I think, at this point, less than a handful.
So about 5 now. We've got 5 non-electeds on there, and it's been a good conversation. But just to remind you before we go too deep, we have been talking about 2 ordinances as we go forward in time on SHS reform. The first of those ordinances was a potential ballot measure to reform how SHS addresses homelessness over the long term, including overhauling governance and oversight, extending the program and integrating services and housing investments. The other ordinance would put in motion key transitions if that measure passed. So these draft ordinances were built from a year of engagement with partner stakeholders and community members, as well as around a half dozen Metro Council work sessions after we received the COO's recommendation letter. As you recall, Metro Council decided to postpone referring a measure to the May ballot for SHS reforms as key coalition partners were advocating for more time to discuss and reach agreement. Since January, our partners in the provider and business advocacy communities have been working to find agreement on elements of a ballot measure that provide revenue and stability for addressing homelessness for many years to come, while also addressing valid concerns about accountability and costs. Those conversations are continuing, and I'm hopeful we will have further information about their progress soon to inform our own deliberations on the best strategy for moving forward with a potential ballot measure. That's not what we're primarily here to talk about today, though. As you'll recall, the work group, we've been hearing from partners that we needed more regional agreement on a vision and how to measure success within the program. We took that call seriously and recognized we had an opportunity to pursue some of these agreements before going to the ballot. In fact, it would be better if we got an agreement on those before we went to a ballot. We knew we had to look beyond the measure. We had to develop a shared vision and commitment to do what this program is seeking to promise. As part of this, we need to acknowledge that the original SHS measure fell short of the standard, which is one reason it has fueled dissatisfaction and distrust from the public and even between agencies. I think I've said this several times to all of us around this table, but the 2 things that were missing from the ballot measure when it was developed were very clear roles and responsibilities and very clear measurements of success. And because we have not had that, lots of folks can then decide what they think their role and responsibility is. And a lot of folks can then measure us against their own standard rather than us getting to an agreed upon standard. So this group has a charge of setting a North Star or vision for the future of the reformed SHS program. This encompasses what are we collectively working toward in the program that is actionable, inspirational, and measurable. I also asked the work group to look at setting key regional performance indicators to measure the success of the program. This will allow us to understand with concrete data whether we are on track to meet the vision we set and how to course correct when we are not. We don't have time to discuss every aspect of reforms, so we have to prioritize on the foundations. And what I mean is the president's work group doesn't have time for all of this. That's why the North Star and the key performance indicators are so critical. That said, we know that there are issues that are interwoven, so we are making time for the work group to discuss data needs, governance structure, and financial scenarios following the agreement we're hoping the coalitions reach. And just a reminder, this would all be advisory recommendations that will be coming out of the president's work group to this council. So by the end of June, this work group will deliver a recommendation on a North Star or mission and outcomes, as we're trying to move to that language, and key performance metrics for Metro Council consideration. I also hope they will provide high-level recommendations on transitioning to the new governance structure as we reform this program. For instance, when we first started talking about the SHS oversight reform with the what I'm now calling the Policy Advisory Committee on Housing and Homelessness, just reversing it, that we were talking about one representative from each county, and it's clear that the county commissioners in each of the counties would like to have more people at the table than just the chairs who have been the primary conversationalists with this measure, that they would like to have more. So I think it's something that we will be obviously considering as a group and then making a recommendation to you. So what we've done so far, we've discussed at a very high level some case studies that you received, and Liam will go through that as part of the content that we'll talk about today. But at our first meeting, we held time at the beginning to discuss the issues arising out of Multnomah County as just the Friday before. The county chair, Multnomah County chair, had held a press conference on the budget deficit. And what came out of that conversation was a recommitment to come together and address the transparency and accountability gaps in our system. We also heard agreement that we need to address the inherent volatility of the SHS taxes through more aligned allocation and budgeting processes. So I was happy to see that after 2 years of work of asking people to come to the table, now there is a consensus that they want to be at the table and really move forward with these reforms. So instead of having it done to them, they seem to be more interested in being part of the reform. The data sharing, following this discussion, we also had an overview of the supportive housing services data landscape as it exists at this moment in our region. What was clear during the presentation is what we really only had the ability to track outputs of programs, which doesn't give us the full picture. The data sharing agreement offers a starting point to access the information we need, but we will need more. And we also talked about the fact that this is a beginning of getting the data for any dollar SHS touches, but what we really need to talk to the counties and our cities and those who are interested in the outcomes of this is to have the state and have any data that the state and federal money touches as well. So we have a more complete and accurate picture. We also need that data to be consistent and reliable and shared in a timely manner. During our second meeting on March 10th, we focused on reviewing the case studies that we are going to talk about here about mission and outcomes from other regions across North America. And again, you have those case studies in your packet. And I'm going to turn it over to Liam now to take us through those case studies, both in the mission outcomes, but also the KPIs, just to give a quick overview. So Liam, thank you.
Good morning, Madam President and Council. It's good to be with you this morning. For the record, my name is Liam Frost, Deputy Director of Housing here at Metro. I use he, him, his pronouns. I just want to take a quick moment to reiterate the importance of establishing a shared North Star, because from an administrative point of view, what we're actually talking about is an organizing principle, allowing for each part of the system to be crystal clear in what it's working towards. And that North Star can then help arrange those component parts towards that one vision. And for a growing regional system of care that we're talking about, this is critical. As President Peterson mentioned, these case studies and slides were designed to initiate a discussion at the work group and to begin getting members of the work group grounded and to share a common understanding. President Peterson went through some of the members of that group, and some of those folks have spent decades in the field, and others come to the issue motivated by addressing a deepening crisis across our region and also national in scope, which is why we put these case studies together. And these case studies are really just a first step or a jumping off point. We're beginning to help folks establish that common understanding. And I should note that during the meeting itself, members of the work group made a number of requests and questions, and our staff are currently responding to add to those case studies. So what you received in your inbox and what you'll hear today will be embellished in the best way possible, in the best way possible, of course. Next slide, please. So what we shared with the work group is, and now I understand where we are. So Commissioner Ben West took the slide last time, but it is really self-explanatory what a North Star should be, providing that simplicity and clarity for everybody, not just from an administrative point of view, but from a constituent, community member, stakeholder, leadership point of view, that we're all driving towards one end. Next slide, please. These were questions that we asked the work group to consider as we went through the case studies, questions to elicit discussion and dialogue. I think it would be good for you all to keep in mind as we go through these case studies as well. Next slide, please. So what we shared with the work group is very high level. Housing insecurity and homelessness is not just a Portland region issue. It's not just a West Coast issue. It is now a national issue, causing many households to lose their housing every day in communities across America. The title of this slide, I think all of you will recognize at this point, it is almost ubiquitous in the work of homeless services, indeed across this country and in parts of the rest of the world too. The phrase rare, brief, and non-recurring comes from the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. Some of you may have read in the news last week that the Trump administration right now is making moves to dismantle that agency. Looks like they're going to be successful, but I think about 15, 16 years ago, USICH, as it's referred to, came up with this goal for homelessness to be rare, brief, and non-recurring, to create a system where whenever possible and when it does occur, it is quickly resolved so that individuals do not experience prolonged or repeated homelessness. Fundamentally, it accepts that people will always experience homelessness in some form, but when it does, the fewest people possible should experience it. And if it does occur, it should be very short, and people should not cycle in and out of homelessness. I think from a public policy point of view or a public budgeting point of view, it is really important to note that the longer that someone experiences homelessness, the more challenging it is for that person to exit homelessness, which means it becomes increasingly expensive for the system to respond. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to breeze through these slides. They're pretty self-explanatory for counselors who have read the packet materials. There's a lot more information in those materials. So I'm going to touch upon some of this stuff here. One thing I want to pull out is that term continuum of care. You saw it in the last slide. You've seen it in this slide. It's not just a term of art. It's a requirement by HUD. It's been a requirement for about 30 years now. And originally it was intended to take a fragmented system and require local communities to come together in partnership to apply for HUD funding for 4 major things, which is outreach, shelter, housing, and prevention, homelessness prevention too. So when you're hearing COC or continuum of care, these are real things. For example, in Washington County, it's Beaverton, Hillsborough, and Washington County. They are the continuum of care. They are the folks who arrange federal funding to be distributed in the community. Here locally, we have 3 COCs. In Houston, as you see before you, they have 1 continuum of care. 3 counties, 2 cities, I think it's Houston and Pasadena, Councilor Simpson. You'll be familiar with that, I'm sure. I think as you are taking a look at this slide, as opposed to the other slides, I think Houston is one of the major cities in America where homelessness has reduced over the last 16 years, since 2011. I'm just going to take a look at my numbers here very quickly. it's decreased by 63% from 8,000 to 3,000 folks experiencing homelessness in 2024. And one other piece around around Houston that's important to note, they have a significantly different housing market. They went through a regulatory reform in the late 90s that put housing production basically on steroids. So both ends of the homelessness spectrum, in the prevention and in the solutions part, where you're placing folks out of homelessness into housing, it's been a lot easier. It's hard to say the word easier when it comes to addressing homelessness, but for Houston compared to others, it has been. You'll also note here that the North Star is, surprise, surprise, homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring as part of that United States Interagency Council on Homelessness. Next slide, please. We're going to stay in Texas. We have multiple KPIs here. By the way, the KPIs for a lot of different regions are centered in that continuum of care model. The best practices that are shared through COCs. So for example, San Antonio uses the number of people experiencing homelessness, the returns to homelessness once they're in the system, and people becoming homeless for the first time. I'm going to touch on a few other KPIs too, so you can get familiar with that. The two North Stars they have here ensure everyone has a place to call home and significantly and efficiently reduce homelessness. I think they work together really well. One is obviously centered on the best practices on homeless services in terms of getting everybody to a home eventually. And then also that second point there, really addressing community-wide concerns around homelessness and its variety of impacts on folks. Next slide, please. Surprise, surprise, we're in Canada. What's not so much of a surprise here, though, is that one of the North Stars here for Alberta and Calgary is rare, brief, and non-recurring. Again, it has been an adopted North Star for many places beyond the United States for the reasons I outlined earlier. The interesting thing here about Calgary is that they have a nonprofit that's currently running what is like a continuum of care. I think the important thing to note here, even as far afield as Canada, politics around homelessness and jurisdictional conflicts, as well as tensions between service providers and government have come into play there. You'll see that it is a nonprofit hub currently, but the government there is moving to take the allocation of homeless services dollars, yes, back into the government away from that nonprofit. So again, a lot of the issues that we see here are prevalent across both the United States and indeed Canada. The third point under structure there is the Alberta Recovery Model, which is a health-based model through the Alberta health system. They work in tandem with the homeless services system. Over the past 2 years here, we've been engaged with our healthcare systems, and we are building a regional system of care for folks specifically who are experiencing behavioral health issues. We are very much looking forward to bringing that briefing to you as soon as possible. Next slide, please. All right, King County, Washington, and Seattle. Again, you'll see they have a regional continuum of care. You'll note that their North Star is more focused on urgency as quickly as possible than perhaps the others that we've used. But again, trying to make homelessness brief, and they're really leaning into that as quickly as possible, moniker there. Some of the KPIs that King County uses are returns to homelessness and the utilization of housing units, which I personally think is interesting, tracking what's available and being efficient with our systems to ensure that folks are taking use of available space. The homeless count in Seattle continues to rise. Over the last couple of years, they've seen a 5% increase from 2021 to 2023 in this latest point in time count. I believe they just completed, like everywhere else, their 2025 point in time count, and I'll be curious to look at those numbers in the coming months. Next slide, please. Denver, Colorado. And I should maybe take a pause here and talk about the rationale for choosing some of these jurisdictions. When we met with President Peterson and Commissioner West, our instructions were to not just focus on the West Coast, but really focus nationwide to better understand what folks are doing further afield. I think a lot of the time we do lean into that West Coast comparison because housing markets are very similar here, but it has been a good education in looking at some of these other case studies and helping inform what we might do next. In Denver, they have one continuum of care with multiple jurisdictions. Their North Star is a safe, stable place to call home. Councilor Lewis, you may remember that from campaigns of old. It's pretty old school, but nonetheless relevant. Some of the KPIs that they use are, again, people experiencing homelessness, that point in time count. And then they also incorporate economic and housing market indicators, which I also think is interesting to consider in the future as we take a look at the broader factors and variables that go into influencing homelessness. Significantly about Denver, their number of folks experiencing homelessness has increased dramatically by about 32% compared to 2022. The number of unsheltered folks experiencing homelessness was by about 74%, the largest jump that they've had on record. The significance of that jump does indicate that there might be some data issues and definition issues. That is pretty extreme, but nonetheless, I guess consistent with other areas across the country apart from Houston. Next slide and last case study here, we have upstate South Carolina. This was a request from Mayor Rosner. We have one continuum of care, 13 counties. I think that's notable here. In Oregon, I think we have 9 continuums of care, 3 locally here in the region. This one continuum of care in upstate South Carolina covers 13 counties. The North Star is to prevent, reduce, and end homelessness through coordination of agencies in our communities. Pretty boilerplate language there, I'd say. Some of the KPIs that they use are exits to permanent housing, length of time experiencing homelessness, returns to homelessness, the number of people experiencing homelessness. Nothing too far outside of the box there. I think very consistent with most jurisdictions across the country because of that continuum of care model that we have based the foundation of our homeless systems on from HUD. So in summary, there's a lot we can learn from other jurisdictions. Different jurisdictions have approached the national housing and homelessness crisis differently to meet unique needs, the demographics of their constituents, and also some of the service needs. How many youth are exiting the foster care system? How many folks are experiencing homelessness and severe persistent mental illness? I think folks have been able to shape their responses, but also stayed within that rubric of the continuum of care as prescribed by HUD. I think what's also important to note is that they've also taken advantage of their unique jurisdictional features. You've noted here one continuum of care versus multiple continuums of care in a system helps coordinate that North Star that President Peterson is advocating for. And I also think the local housing dynamics play a really big factor here. I talked about Houston just a moment ago and about their regulatory reform around housing development, and we've seen some commensurate beneficial impacts to the homeless population in Houston. Sorry, I meant Houston, not Denver. So I think the challenges that each jurisdiction faces are not so different from ours: rising number of people experiencing homelessness, intense public scrutiny. But the last thing I'll say is what we have here maybe is far more opportunity to improve and build upon what we've done because of SHS. Those flexible local dollars really are something that not many other jurisdictions have, and in this climate of the federal government right now will become even more valuable. So sorry for taking up too much time this morning. I hope it was helpful. I'll stick around if I can help your discussion at all.
Yeah, thank you, Liam. Before we open up for discussion and any questions for Liam, I want to take just a minute to talk about what we heard from after the conversation with the work group. And even a little deeper into the conversations we've had with Commissioner West as we've been preparing, that folks want this to resonate with the public. So not just a clinical definition, but like what are we actually trying to achieve on behalf of, I'm going to say, the greater society, or not just on behalf of the client in the SHS system or in our region, but also on behalf of our region. What are we trying to accomplish? That they still want to make sure that homeless experience is brief, that they want to talk a lot more in the scope of how are we moving the region forward and folks forward from an economic prosperity lens, as well as safe communities. and still be services and people focused. So there's a lot in there. But yeah, and they just released a report, and we're going to hopefully bring them in for a webinar for the work group to attend virtually. But I think there's a distinct hunger for people to not just talk about housing, but to talk about the services that are being provided. And the conversation with Commissioner West has really been about what is the road to recovery, not just on addiction, not just from that perspective, but from the perspective of economic recovery, from the perspective of stabilizing your family recovery, that the recovery model isn't just about addiction, it's about actual recovery of the person or the family. And I think starting to get that mindset around this is going to need to be important, because what we're finding is that we have certainly put in and leaned into getting people places off the street, temporarily and permanent. But obviously the mayor is looking at the overnight shelters, but the access to the actual services is limited. And so what does success look like if you have limited access to services? Are you on the road to recovery, or are you stuck in wherever you ended up? So I think that this is hopefully it's a widening conversation and not a narrowing conversation. And by that, I mean, it's not just about SHS, it's about how do we actually deliver results, and how does the state play in that? How does the federal government in the future play into that, especially if there's no HUD? With that, I will just close it out and say thank you for listening to Liam and I, give an overview and just open it up to any questions or comments. Counselors, any observations before we? Counselor Simpson, Counselor Lewis, any other observations?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, President Peterson. I think to the point of widening the conversation, I think that there's more to come. I believe I shared that with you all, but I believe that everybody's moving in the right direction, or at least in this body, in this group, folks are very, again, solution oriented, but really around the person, the individual, and what that system looks like in terms of their care and their return, if they return back to homelessness. I think that is going to be the important piece. But again, defining what our North Star is, and whether it's rare, brief, or reoccurring with some urgency added into it, that remains to be seen from that work group. So I'll pass it to Councilor Lewis if she has any comments.
Sure. Thank you so much. I think that the preliminary discussions, the president's work group, have been very productive. I think we also were smart to increase participation from non-electeds. I think there is the balance in particular in this conversation of having folks who are decision makers, but also contextual. We've heard multiple times every other table that we have has somebody from the medical, behavioral, mental health field. We need that here. So I'm glad we're in tandem on that, because that's a whole separate set of investments. And, frankly, a cash flow model that is just as strained, but when you're talking about it from the housing side, it's considered a stream of money that's more dependable. That may not always be true, particularly given federal action. But I do think that needing to understand everybody's in a resource constrained environment, and how choices get made limit one side of the system or the other. When it comes to the case studies that were presented, I think that we have a really healthy ecosystem. We've got over 150 nonprofits that the Tri-County has recognized as all three counties are, what do we call that? They're eligible to contract through all three counties because Washington County gave them the Tri-County seal of approval. And so looking at the number of agencies for the continuums of care listed, We are right-sized, both for the population, but also to actually have competition so that we are able to make sure that we're contracting with the right providers for the right parts of the system. And then finally, I just want to bring up what was in the packet about Denver. It didn't hit the slide, but Denver actually has some sub-regional zones or more localized targets. And I think that's an interesting thing to think about. And I need to learn more. But they're looking not only as they're crafting their goals and their KPIs for the whole region, they also have some of them that they drill down to more specific geography. And I think for us, where we already have 3 counties doing 3 separate things, up, but also recognize we have 3 counties starting from 3 different points, and we might need to hold them to different standards or give different guidelines, because people really do assume that now that we have a regional fund, there is going to be some way in which you can go from one county to the other and expect the same sorts of things.
Yeah, I thought that Denver sub-region conversation was really interesting. I'm glad you pointed it out.
Can I ask a quick
Yeah.
question on that? Since y'all, since y'all have been working on this super closely, that doesn't compare to like a local implementation plan necessarily, right? Is it even deeper than what an LIP is?
I think
what do you
it's
think on
further
that?
up than an
Further
LIP,
up? Okay.
because the whole region recognizes the difference between here and there. And you're the one who's done more of the research.
We're actually still gathering that research, but I thank you for the comparison there, Councilor Gonzalez, because while our regions are designated by legal restrictions through the county structures, these are my understanding is that these are regions as it relates to urban, more rural areas. And so I'm looking for the research from our team first before I can actually confidently respond to that. But it is something that personally I'm really interested in looking at more because we have somewhat arbitrary boundaries here.
Yeah, and okay. And that's fine. I don't need a specific, it's like more dialogue-y anyway, but would it kind of then be like a central city as a sub area? Is that kind
Could
of an
be.
example of what Denver did? Like their downtown, or is it different? I'm just trying to visualize it.
Yeah, no, I think these are all good questions. And I think we were talking about having a panel even of some of these case studies coming and presenting at the president's work group in order to delve a little deeper. But I think that's probably a good follow-up.
Well, for example, King County's just started introducing subregions.
And is Central City separate from,
Seattle will be separate, yeah.
no,
Sorry, Central City and Seattle, yeah.
Yeah.
The King County's just so, well, as you know, as you're very aware.
okay. Counselor Rosenthal, and then Wong, and then Nolan.
Thank you, President Peterson. First of all, I want to thank Liam for that nice summary of the regional studies. I think that's very good. And I also appreciate the summary of what the President's Work Group has been dealing with. That said, I have to say that I've been a bit frustrated lately because we keep using the term North Star without really talking about what the North Star is. And the sooner we can get to actually specifying what that is, I think the better we will be. I think the HUD definition provides a good basis for the North Star, or at least the core of that North Star. I think we all understand that those terminologies are applicable. I would add 2 additional considerations, some of which have been addressed here. The first one is best practices, which doesn't really show up there. I think we know what best practices are, or at least we have some idea in some areas. We perhaps know what best practices are when it comes to drug counseling, perhaps when it comes to some sort of mental health stability, perhaps when it comes to carceral treatment and so forth. That's one thing that I think we need to add. The other thing I think we need to add, which has been addressed here, is sensitivity to regional demographics. For example, the situation in Beaverton is very different from the situation in Wilsonville or Sherwood. And these communities pride themselves on their identity and on their demographics. And when they're well-run, which many of them are, they are very sensitive to the kinds of situations that their residents have. So I think sensitivity to regional demographics, and that was just addressed recently, whether Seattle King County is going to have a core group and then deal with some of the, How do you deal with it in Issaquah? How do you deal with it in Bellevue? So I think those are things we need to add. And then just one little final minor thing. I have to point out from a senior standpoint that continuum of care means two things. In terms of housing services, it means providing the whole range of services. For senior group, it means living situations that provide continuum of care as you get older and less capable. So that we have to remember there are two definitions of that continuum of care or continuation of care, just to make that point. Okay. I think that's all I have to say. I think it's, we're moving forward, but the sooner we have a specific proposal for what we consider a North Star, I think the more healthy the debate will be.
Thank you. Obviously, that's what we're attempting to do. Counselor Wong.
Thank you, Madam President, and thanks for all the members of the work group. I think we're making good headway on everything that we said. I really appreciate kind of the effort to look at the challenges we face more holistically, especially around the economic recovery piece. I think I've said in past work sessions that if we're not really working towards addressing some of the root causes, the issue will only continue to grow. So I appreciate that. I'm wondering, I think another thing I've been really thinking about is just all the different resources and streams of money that come into the system. And I'm hoping that conversation is happening at the work group where we can see, how we're deploying SHS dollars, but also what other resources are coming into play, and just having a more holistic view of the system. I don't know if that's come up. Hopefully it has. But I'm also just wondering the case studies, and I didn't do a deep dive, but in the other regions that we looked at, what does it look like for whatever entity to have that holistic view, like of resources coming in from state, local, and federal, and also from the health sector? Like, do any of the regions have like a comprehensive platform where they're able to map out kind of all the money in, money out to see if they can deliver kind of one kind of integrated system or approach instead of siloed approaches?
Oh, well, that's not something that we looked into, but we're now going to add it to our response packet, Alice, if that's okay with you. Off the top of my head, though, I know that King County has local sources of funding. LA obviously famously has one main source of funding that they just renewed last November. But to my mind, I'm not sure that there is a dashboard that is readily available to demonstrate how systems receive funding and then how they're distributed. But I agree with you, that kind of transparency not only will be helpful for stakeholders and community members, but I think it'll be helpful to keep us all accountable internally too. I like that idea.
Yeah, well, I think we just need to see all the resources that are available at our disposal, because we need increased efficiency in harder times. And then we have this narrative where SHS is going to be all end all, and we all know that's not going to be the case. So all the different funders and levels of government need to work together to create those efficiencies. So just wonder if anyone else is able to accomplish that, which requires true financial data sharing from various partners in some way. But I think that's a system we need.
And you heard me elevating earlier the continuums of care model that have been around for about 30 years. That is what SHS has been injected into, for better or worse. So we can leverage some of those constituent parts of those systems, and some of them might restrain us in certain ways. But what we have with SHS is a leveraging opportunity to see how we can best use not just SHS dollars, but those federal sources of funding too. Great. I agree with you. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Nolan, Gonzalez, and then Lewis.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for the presentation. Thanks for all the good work that the members of the work group are doing. Could we get the first slide of the presentation up, the one that has the characteristics for a North Star? The one that I remember from that slide is clarity.
Mhm.
And I don't see clarity, clear and simple. Okay. I'm struggling with seeing any of the case study North Stars as meeting these criteria. Even the one that we have been toying with because it's used elsewhere, the rare, brief, and non-recurring. I don't think that's clear. What does rare mean? Once in a lifetime? 1 out of 100,000 people in the region? Or 1 out of 200,000 people in the region? Brief, is that 2 days? Is that 2 weeks? Is it 2 months? It's hard to know if you're getting there, because if we went around the room and asked everyone to define what brief means, we haven't wrestled with that yet. I'm hoping that the work group will wrestle with that kind of clarity. I think we avoid it because there are different expectations. The humanitarian in all of us wants it to be 1 in a million people. The fiscal realist among us knows that it is more likely to be closer to 1 in a couple 100,000. But if we accept a vague description instead of grappling with the tough issues that imply trade-offs, I don't think we're moving toward a regional system that meets the second criterion, for example. That it's interpreted, I presume that means consistently across the entirety of the system. And maybe that's a question we ought to ask. Do we expect that in a regional system, the standards are consistent? Maybe the methods of getting to those standards, they differ from county to county. But if it's brief, is it 2 months brief in downtown Portland and 2 days in Beaverton or Wilsonville? We should address directly. Do we want a system that is consistent, has the same standards around the entire region, allowing local jurisdictions discretion in how they achieve those standards? And I think that's part of what has caused some of our challenges with the counties, that there are at least 3, and maybe multiple beyond 3, definitions of what the outcome should be. And we'll either always be there if the objective is to improve, or the objective is to reduce. If you go from 1,000 to 999, you've improved or reduced, but is that really success? So I'm suggesting that there's an opportunity with the work group to really air what those questions are, and to really contemplate the implications of that and make choices that may not be what, almost certainly won't be what every single person around the table walked into the conversation expecting it to be. But that everybody can walk out of the conversation saying, I understand it, it makes sense, it's fiscally doable, it's aggressive, we need ambitious goals.
Awesome, thank you. I think that is how I have felt about rare, brief, and non-recurring. I don't know what it means. And it's open to interpretation from anybody. So it's a great concept, but what does it actually mean? And how do we also talk about where we're at? How do we know where we're at? And what is a pragmatic goal and what's a stretch goal? Those are all, I think, things that we're gonna have to grapple with. Yes. Who is next?
Counselor Gonzalez, Lewis, and then Rosenthal.
Sweet, thanks. Yeah, I don't know if I have much more to add. I think the conversation has been super rich. You know, I had a little piece of paper here that I was working on. I'll put it on the camera here. But basically, it's really similar to the conversation around, you know, our North Star has generally been around those rare, brief, and non-recurring elements that we discussed. And I interpreted with the document and the case studies that our opportunity to define what rare, brief, and non-recurring is actually to set those regional KPIs. And so it's great to see what other regions are doing, whether it's length of time of homelessness, returns, the focus on data and real-time data to be able to do those things. But that to me feels like, again, the work that y'all get to do right now, and it's very exciting. And so I want to continue encouraging the hard work that I know that you're doing into pushing into the uncomfortable questions that need to be asked about what it exactly is that we expect, and ultimately how we can communicate this to our neighbors and to our voters as well. So yeah, but like I said, I don't feel like I have much to add because I really appreciate where the conversation's going right now.
Great, thank you. Counselor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. Counselor Rosenthal said best practices, and I think that's a really big door to open. I think there are certain places where Metro definitely has thought through what best practices are in a helpful way. And some of that's through our technical assistance and looking at how money moves through the system, particularly as it moves from governments who are responsible to our citizenry and our taxpayers, and then to nonprofits who also have a public purpose, but also have some more specialization. And there's been pushback on the use of that phrase at the service delivery level. And we've heard it at Tri-County Planning Body. One, because I think from a regional perspective, that's getting into where counties actually have more expertise. But also, for too long, this is a field where we've been trying to square peg round hole people, and best practices imply there is one path from the static state to the future state, or from where somebody is to where they're trying to get to. And we need to evolve and recognize that we need to meet people where they're at with the individualized set of services. So I just want to bring up that complexity about where we should be working towards those sorts of practice standards versus where service providers and counties are going to know best. There are folks at the Tri-County Planning Body who can say some of that far more eloquently, and it's probably in the meeting minutes. But just wanted to channel some of that feedback I've heard in past months. Liam, am I nailing what some of my friends would say?
That was very consistent with what I think it was Sahan was saying.
Sahan has said it at least twice,
Yes.
and I'm not Sahan, but I'm trying to channel what we've heard.
Great job.
It's a good job.
Thanks. Counselor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm afraid I'm going to have to disagree with two of my fellow councilors in some regards. First of all, I do not consider best practices to be a specific practice. It is a constellation on how we apply. The point I was trying to make is that there is information out there on best practices applied to different groups in different situations, and that paying attention not just to what local entities want to do, but sometimes to what has been done and what can be accomplished in other similar situations. So I do not consider it as particularly limiting. Secondly, on the North Star and the idea, North Star is a goal, not a metric. And I think we have to be very careful there. So I don't think that we can apply specific numbers to this thing when we're talking about rare and short-term. those concepts are different depending on whether you're talking about seniors who might be evicted from their housing or apply to young people who are pretty fluid in their lifestyle. And so the concepts are somewhat variable, and I don't think we can specify specific numbers in specific cases. So like I said, it's not really a metric. And then one other point I want to make, which I forgot to make earlier, is that one of the ones talked about data driven. We have to be careful. Data are important. It's a plural word, but data are important, but this is human driven, not data driven. We use data to measure metrics of whether we are actually meeting the human goals. The human goals are more important, or should always be more important in this process than the data. So we have to be careful. It's a tough balance sometimes. Sometimes we'll just look at the numbers and say, hey, we're succeeding. But then we really have to go out and talk to the people who are experiencing it. And that's one of the reasons why I've suggested that we have people with lived experience on any council we create in the future. We have to know whether the data are really representing the human experiences involved. And so I think those are the principles that I feel are important.
Thank you. Interestingly enough, Mayor Rosner did a deep dive into KPIs. It's kind of in his line of work. And when he looked through the case studies and across other case studies, he categorized the KPIs into people-focused KPIs, system-focused KPIs, outcome-focused KPIs, equity-focused KPIs, and prevention-focused KPIs. And then did an even deeper dive on whether they were actually a correlation to success on the ground with those KPIs. And then deeper than that, the evidence of the correlation. So I'm looking forward to using his PhD that he just went through on being able to categorize these, and again, seeing from the different perspectives, how do we drive towards the things that we actually say we want to achieve in the mission outcome that we'll be creating? Because obviously what you measure is what drives things then, and you can drive things in the wrong direction if you've got the wrong kind of KPI. So we just want to be very careful and think through this. Again, go slow to go fast.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Councilor Gonzalez.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, I really appreciate you sharing that example of Mayor Rosner. Just, I think for my experience being with Metro and on this issue with SHS, there's so much expertise around the region, in every corner of this region, elected leaders, nonprofit leaders, healthcare leaders that care really deeply about this, and that want to work with us to design the system that is going to help us meet our goals. And so I think to kind of take one of the things that I'm from Councilor Rosenthal's words is that we need to be really rigorous, and that we need to be open, and to give the multiple perspectives the opportunity, and to not just define it as Metro in our MRC building, right? And so I think I'm seeing that work happen. And again, I think it's like, let's ask those hard questions and continue to have great conversations like this.
Yeah, the way I've looked at this work is similar to the dust up we had in the region about 15 years ago, when we were looking at development along stream corridors. And for 2 years, the region debated, and unfortunately I was in every one of these conversations, whether it was 25 foot, 50 foot, 75 foot, 200 feet setbacks, or no development at all, in order to bring our stream corridors back. And after 2 years of debate and not getting anywhere, Council President Bragdon at the time did a timeout and said, you know what we really need is just to define what does a clean stream mean, and then have every city basically do their own plan to be able to meet that clean stream criteria. What are the parts per million that we're looking for? What does it mean to reduce the nitrogen in the river itself, and then come up with the plan, because every geography is different. The mix of housing is different. And so one plan for everybody wasn't going to work. And what we find now is that between the work that we're doing and the work that we did with the region is that a lot of those stream corridors are coming back. And so I think, you know, it's a good parallel conversation to say, what are we, if you can define what you're trying to achieve, and then people can say, okay, here's how we think we can get there, based on our population, based on our needs, based on what we have going on. So I'm hoping that we can get together around that and really use that example, because we've done it many times before like that, but it's just a really good example. It doesn't help to say 25 or 75-foot setback. What are you actually trying to achieve? Councilor Rosenthal and Nolan, apologies. I didn't realize we were going around again.
I already said my piece.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Councilor Nolan.
Yes, thank you. I want to go back in history a little bit and talk about the analogy that comes to mind for me, and that is the Oregon Health Plan, in which we collectively, with experts and public, decided what the most important outcomes to achieve were. In terms of health outcomes, in that case, here we could define it in terms of, is it most important that homelessness be non-recurring? And if that's the case, what investments do best practices tell us need to be done? And, you know, compare that with where we prioritize non-recurring or brief. If we are able, and it will take a lot of discussion because there are different perspectives around this table, no doubt when this table grows by 3 times, even more different perspectives. But if we can agree on what those human results are, what the impact on human lives is, and this approach requires some acknowledgement that we are not in a position with these resources to do everything. What are the most important contributions this resource can make to a comprehensive plan to avoid homelessness, which includes regulatory, federal policy, statewide policy, and other things that we don't have direct control over. But is it most important that homelessness be non-recurring, in which case we really have to invest heavily in the people who need the most support, because they're the ones most at risk of falling back into homelessness, and probably falling back into homelessness fairly quickly, absent the services that we are able to and could commit to providing. Is it important, you know, how does that compare with the importance that it be brief? You know, and brief could have different implementation mechanisms. It could be Mayor Wilson's night shelters. It could be, it could include rent assistance. It could include other things. But if the answer is we want everything, then the decisions about where to prioritize resources will be made individually by caseworkers or outreach workers or shelter operators, instead of be consistent and set by collective community expectations.
Agreed. And I think if you look at a curve of the number of homelessness over time and you see the large increase, right? We've got a lot of folks that we need to work on that are now chronic homeless. And the question is, how often do these change, depending on what we're trying to achieve now versus what we're trying to achieve in another 5 years? What are we trying to, what is the outcome in 5 years versus 25 years? So I think, yeah, I think we're going to need to prioritize based on where the greatest need is, and then follow those folks through and make sure we're also not inadvertently allowing more folks to fall into homelessness than we had intended, so. All right, oh, yeah, Counselor Wong.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited for progress that's being made, and I'm wondering, in June, when we do have, KPIs and North Star, what would we do to like kind of bring it out to the community and ground truth it? Because I think we have buy-in from the committee and providers. I think that's a really good start, but like, how do we build that broader consensus? Are we going to spend some time on community engagement with the general public and do a road show or something like that? Just wondering, like, if the intent is to build shared understanding, like how do we go from the theory part to the now we're on the same page part? So that's my first question. And just secondly, like, the appreciations for the three of you serving on the committee, but what can the rest of us counselors do in the meantime to, be part of that conversation and build that consensus?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a deeper conversation about that because if and when we do put something out to the ballot, there's going to have to be a division, and the staff will no longer be able to help with that conversation. So we're going to have to figure out how to have that conversation, and where staff can actually help.
Yeah, it's just
because there's the ballot measure, and there's perception, and I don't want to get into conflicts. So
it feels kind of like a compressed timeline to do some engagement around the North Star.
But I don't know if we need to finalize it until after the ballot, but we certainly need a proposal going into the ballot. And how we deal with that in between times. And if we don't go to the ballot, then we certainly have time. But thank you. I think that's a really good point. Liam, anything to close us out?
I just say keep all eyes on that report that's coming out. I think there's some really important information in there that's relevant to this discussion. We can make sure that gets out to all of you, but I'd encourage you to read it thoroughly if you get the chance.
And that's specifically the
HSI report on service interventions and homelessness systems specific to Multnomah County.
Yeah. So as soon as that's out, we'll distribute it to the council.
Exactly.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks so much, Liam.
Thank you.
Thanks, housing staff. Been a lot of work. All right. We'll move on to Chief Operating Officer Communication.
Thank you, Council President Peterson. Good morning, Council. For today's update, I just wanted to let everyone know about an upcoming event at Lone First Cemetery. Metro and the Lone First Cemetery Foundation are joining together on Saturday, April 5th from 11 to 1 p.m. to host an event in honor of Qingming, or Tomb Sweeping Day, at the historic Chinese section of the cemetery. The event will be a chance to hear updates on the project to build a memorial to those who are buried at the site, as well as an opportunity to view possible concepts for art to honor the departed. Artists Chi Yu and Sophia Xiaofun Ostrens will present ideas for the future memorial's altar and seek feedback from community members. The event will also offer time and space to pay respects to ancestors and to honor the site's history, and is free and open to everyone. A couple of quick reminders. The Employee Wellness Fair is tomorrow at the Regional Center from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. There'll be a variety of fun activities, so stop by if you can. And then tomorrow is also free parking day at Metro's parks. You can enjoy free parking at Oxbow, Blue Lake Regional Park, Broughton Beach, the M. James Gleason Memorial Boat Ramp, and Chinook Landing Marine Park. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Communication. Counselor Simpson and Lewis.
Thank you, President Peterson. Just a quick update. I had the opportunity to attend the Columbia Corridor Association luncheon on Friday through the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District invite. It was a nice turnout event. The mayor was the keynote speaker, Mayor Keith Wilson, and he had a good message to the crowd, which was basically what we covered today. Is we're gonna address homelessness only together as community. And of significant mention for the city manager, Mike Jordan, was awarded the Bob Stacy Award. So he was a first recipient of that award. So really touching moment to really continue to honor Bob's legacy, or Councilor Stacy's legacy, as we continue to do the good work that he set us all forth on. So thank you.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Colleagues, I wanted to share, first, I was in DC last week, participating in a series of meetings, both with Portland State University's Center for Women's Leadership and then with Pacific Northwest Waterways. And PNWA in particular had some learnings and takebacks about how some of our infrastructure agencies are proceeding forward, even despite loss of staff. With permitting and some of the work that they need to do, Army Corps of Engineers in particular. So I want to bring that back to us and what we're doing here. But then I also wanted to report back that the Metro South Enhancement Grant Committee met for the first time of this cycle. We will aim to give out $400,000 this year. And the precedent that we've set for the past few years is if you receive a grant 2 years in a row, you need to take the third year off before you can apply again. Given where we're sensing things are with the economy, we are actually not adhering to that requirement this year. And we'd like all eligible grantees or potential grantees to apply, and each individual will reflect on the merits of giving somebody 3 years in a row versus not. So just want to publicly share folks who are eligible in the Metro South Enhancement Area District, Oregon City, should all apply.
Awesome. Thank you. Councilor Rosenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I just want to say a report from the WCCC, which met yesterday. They considered particularly the proposed REFA bonding issue. They were fairly uniform in their opposition to reducing all the funds for the bonding, and very supportive of doing all the bonding for the TV highway and the 82nd project. They were a bit concerned about some of the other ones being of regional significance. That's one thing. The second thing I want to mention is I happened to attend the State of the City at the city of Beaverton yesterday. It was a very well presented performance. Mayor Beatty had a very good presentation combined with some good videos. One of the things they mentioned, and she made a strong commitment to continuing to support diversity, equity, inclusion. Now, I've been looking at, some people say, well, we should just change the words, and that'll protect us from the ravages of this chainsaw massacre that's going on in the federal government. And I thought of the words, well, togetherness, variety, and fairness. I don't think that really quite cuts it. I have to say that from my standpoint, these are principles. They're not a program. They're not a meme. They're not a woke part of government. They're principles on which we will create a future vision for the kinds of communities we want to live in. I will continue to be embarrassed and shamed until Metro actually reaffirms its commitment to these principles going forward.
Okay. Just to recap where we are, I believe we have committed to those principles several times. Do you have a summary of that off the top of your head?
Happy to share, first of all, many people, this is a topic of conversation everywhere, at every level of Metro. There are a lot of questions swirling because the executive orders made people feel that they were doing something wrong. And Metro has stated values around racial equity, diversity, inclusion, that we continue to follow and we continue to enact. We believe that all of our activities are lawful. And so there's no reason to interrupt those activities, whatever we call them. I think we have a decades-long record of being strong on that point. And when I'm asked by employees, when I'm asked by community members, that's what I'm saying. And I'm also sharing that our council has shared with me that those values have not changed. And I have their full support to continue to move things forward. So I don't know if that helps. I'm happy to go into any, specific
No, and
area.
I think that helps. Thank you. And I think that there's been a lot of outreach. Any of the counselors that want to talk about the outreach efforts that you've made on behalf of council to understand what folks' expectations were of us. If there's anybody who wants to try and summarize that, Counselor Huang.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Councilor Rosenthal, for holding our feet to the fire on this. I do think reaffirming our values is important, but we have been doing, various rounds of meetings and consultations of community partners, especially those serving immigrant communities or communities of color. And I think universally what we're hearing is statements are fine. I believe we've released a few statements now. And what folks, really want to see is action attached to those. They've come up with some ideas, some ambitious and expensive, and some that we could do pretty quickly. But I think that, just putting out statements at this point doesn't have kind of the reassurance or impact that we're hoping to see without specific action. So one consideration is just having kind of more of a statement of values when we start, budgeting in earnest about what, our budget means, and, who is, going to receive the benefits and burdens of how we allocate resources. So I think that's a good frame that, I hope council can really take to heart about kind of the implications of the budget season. So I think that's where, I think absent kind of any other seismic shift, it's really continuing to, live out our values and our commitments, and making sure that, we're doing what we need to do throughout budget season to, protect the communities the best we can.
Can I add some more?
Yes,
Yeah,
please.
just
Thank you.
thanks, President Peterson, since I know that you asked Councilor Wong and I to work on that. And in the last week or two as well, through our new council office structure and with our policy advisors and district advisors, we also work to create a list for every counselor to have the opportunity to engage with folks and specifically to connect with communities in their district. So there are opportunities as well for all of us on the dais to engage on these questions and to ask communities what they want from us and expect from us, and not just what we think they expect from us. I think that's something really important in this time, to go deep and to really exercise that partnership. And so certainly don't want people to feel shame about the approach that our agency is taking, because I think we're taking a very thoughtful and deliberate approach, and we all have our hands on it. And the connection to the budget, I think, is a very powerful and meaningful tool for us, because it's where we truly exercise our values.
Thank you. And Councilor Simpson, you were also doing some of that outreach.
Yeah, thank you, President Peterson. Not to belabor the issue. Thank you to Councilor Wong and Councilor Gonzalez for leading those, conversations in the respective communities. I will just say, based on my outreach to our community partners and the feedback that I've heard is, one, like the messaging is clear. They understand that we as an agency and a council are committed to not only DEI, but to the well-being of those communities. But I think the flip now is being asked for us to reposture ourselves into a place of action and implementation, not just with our budget, but backing it up with how we implement that budget. And so I appreciate those comments, but I again, reposturing ourselves into action mode is where I think a lot of our communities are looking at for us, not just messaging.
Councilor Rosenthal, do you have a comment or
Yeah, I just want to add a comment. I think the comments of Counselor Simpson are very appropriate. And I want to make it clear that I have not, in any conversations I've had with various stakeholders, that I have not implied or tried to imply anything other than that there is a fairly consistent support among the council for these principles and for maintaining these principles. So I have not tried to, say that we are not supporting them. But I think that Counselor Simpson is appropriate in saying that moving forward and being a more demonstrable in action is something that I would support.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that conversation, folks. We're living in a time when obviously we need to get past proclamations on Facebook within 5 minutes of something being done, because there's so much going on that you can't respond to everything. And nor do we want to respond to it, because then we take the eye off the ball of what we're actually trying to achieve. So I think how we're proceeding is extremely thoughtful. And I appreciate the time and energy that the three of you put into really getting out and talking to folks. So thank you. All right, with that, seeing no other hands raised, we are adjourned from council work session. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is Thursday, March 20th, 2025 at 10:30 a.m. See you there.